noise in the background.
Good afternoon, everybody. How's everybody doing? Welcome to another edition of The Works. I'm Keith Williams, your host, and we are right down to the wire for the 2022 primary election, which is in 3 days. 3 days until the big day. So we'll see who is the winners and who are the losers who are going on to the general election in November. So we got 3 more days for that to happen. So listen, we are doing our continuing coverage of the midterm elections, not only nationwide, but the state of Alabama as well. And so we got Chris Christie on here today. And tell them what office are you running for?
Hey, Keith. Yes, I am. My name is Chris Christie, and I am running for Jefferson County Circuit Court Judge, Place 21. That's a civil position, Birmingham Division, which means that I would hear personal injury cases like a car accident or a medical malpractice claim. I would also hear business disputes and workers' compensation cases. So it's a civil position. Civil lawsuits where it will be heard by a jury.
Okay, so we're going to start off with a series of questions here. The first question is tell everybody, who is Chris Christie?
Well, I am a Christian husband and father who is also a lawyer. And I grew up here in Birmingham. I went off to school. I was fortunate enough to have scholarships, and so I went to Rhodes College for undergraduate and went to Duke Law School. When I graduated from law school, I joined the Peace Corps. I spent 2 years in Cameroon, West Africa as a Peace Corps volunteer, and then I returned to Birmingham. I clerked for a judge for 1 year, and then for the last 34 years, I've been practicing the type of law that would be the types of cases that I would be hearing as a judge. You know, cases that would lead to jury trials in a courtroom.
Why did you decide to run for this particular office? What inspired you for this office?
All right, and you know, that's a question that has more than one reason behind it. You know, in some ways, it's because it's a way for me to serve. It's something that I can do for the community. You know, my things that I've done in the past, the pro bono cases that I've handled, the death row inmates that I've represented, the abused prisoners that I've represented. You know, I've represented a lot of people who I didn't get paid to represent. And, you know, this is to me is another extension, another way that I can serve. Bob Vance has the seat that I'm running for right now. And when some other retired judges learned that Bob Vance was not going to run for re-election, they asked me to run. You know, Judge Houston Brown was the friend of mine who is the most influential in talking to me about running. And so, you know, when I was first suggested to me, the first person I talked to was my wife. And my wife's reaction was that you've been preparing to be a judge for all your life. And then I talked to my preacher, my minister, and he had a similar reaction. And then I talked to some other lawyers and some judges. And so it's something that I want to do to serve. It's something I want to do because from the reactions I've gotten from people, I would be good at it. And it's something different for me to do at this stage of my career.
Have you had a lot of questions about the judicial system while you was on the campaign trail?
You know, I have, and it's sort of interesting though, the questions I get usually involve the criminal justice system, all right? And I understand that because it's something that people see on TV more, and it's easier for them to sort of identify the problems that arise from the criminal system. I have never been paid to handle a criminal case. I have represented criminal defendants for free though. And, you know, I would have a large learning curve if I was running for a criminal position because of my limited experience in that area. What I've done to be paid for, frankly, what I did to have money to pay my mortgage and to be able to pay for my 3 children's college is represent people in civil cases where I got paid to represent them in civil cases. So, and that's the type of position, that's the type of cases. So the position that I'm running for would hear the type of cases that have been what I've done for most of my time, 80% of my time over the last 34 years.
I find that kind of interesting that you're running for a civil judgeship, but you have a lot of people asking you about the criminal side of the judicial system. Why do you believe that some people are asking those type of questions?
You know, the types of cases that I've handled that get more publicity, that people have heard of more, and this is more, and it's particularly lawyers, is the pro bono work I've done. I've represented a number of men on death row and supervised other lawyers who are representing men on death row. So at one time, I was supervising cases that were men who had been convicted of capital murder and been sentenced to death, and 26 different men. In other words, 15% of all the people on death row were either people I represented or I supervised the younger lawyers who were representing those men in their post-conviction challenges to their death sentences. 5 of those men we actually got off of death row. And one of those, in addition to those 5, there was a 6th one who we actually proved was innocent through the DNA evidence from the blood from the scene from the crime that happened 20 years ago. So a man who served 20 years on death row who was innocent. And so particularly lawyers hear about those types of things, but then people who know my name, they tend to know that type of work that I've done, which I don't get paid for. I've never been paid for. Again, I've also represented a number of prisoners who have been beaten by guards, and Alabama's prisons do not have an effective discipline process for correctional officers who misbehave, who beat prisoners for no reason. And usually what will happen is they'll file a handwritten complaint, and the judges then will look for someone to represent those prisoners if they think they have a meritorious case. And so I've handled or supervised other lawyers handling about a dozen of those cases over the years. And so the reputation that I've gained in large part from representing pro bono, representing without pay, people who are in a position to where they're either on death row or prisoners have been abused, draws more attention, right? It is part of what I'm known for.
Are you sure you don't have? I mean, I know you mentioned that you have limited, experience in the criminal side of the judiciary. Are you sure that's correct? Because you sound like you have a pretty good resume there.
I know the problems in the criminal justice system, but when you're presiding over a trial, ruling on evidentiary objections or other objections that the lawyers may make requires familiarity with that courtroom. And I have never tried a criminal jury trial. All right. I have handled post-conviction, after death row inmates were convicted and then sentenced to death. I have handled the challenges that are after that, but I don't have the instincts that you would hope that a judge would have who had been representing criminal defendants or working for the district attorney's office by handling criminal jury trials. So I could handle a criminal judge position, but I'm much more comfortable and ready to have a civil circuit court judge position.
You mentioned something about that you already, the cases that you would be, let's say that you was elected judge, and the cases that that you would be presiding over, you've already dealt with them as a lawyer. Is that correct? That's correct.
Those types of cases, yes.
Okay. Can you expound on that for just a little bit?
All right. So a lot of the lawsuits that I've handled, especially over the last, since 2010, is representing healthcare providers. And by that, I mean mostly doctors, but I've also represented hospital systems. I've represented hospice companies. And I've also represented plaintiffs. But I don't handle medical malpractice cases myself. I have represented, though, for example, physician practice groups who get sued, and then they want to make sure their insurance company pays the lawyers and handles the case well. And so I've represented a lot of doctors. So that's one way to think about it. I've represented other businesses. So if you want to put a broad picture on what I've done, I've represented both plaintiffs and defendants in complex litigation, complicated cases. You know, I represented one of the biggest cases I handled. I represented all of the state of Alabama employees in a class action where I was suing their insurance company who had mishandled the investments that they had been handling for the Alabama state employees. That's another example of some of the types of cases. So complex litigation, complicated litigation, class actions, is the type of things I've done, representing both plaintiffs, meaning like, for example, the state of employees of the state of Alabama, and representing defendants on both sides.
Okay. From to the best of your ability, what kind of day you think that if you was elected judge, what kind of day would you see yourself, in if and when you are elected?
Right. So most of my time as a judge is going to be reading. All right. That's a non-exciting thing to talk about. But if you want to talk about terms of number of hours in a civil judge position, the lawyers file motions, and you will spend most of your time reading those motions and deciding how to rule on those motions. I will probably be actually presiding over jury trials anywhere from 6 to 12 weeks a year, right? So then you got to think about, all right, what are you doing the rest of the time? Well, you're helping the lawyers get through the process so they're ready to try the case. Complicated cases, jury trials take a lot of work before you get to trial. So if you have a personal injury, which is where most people can individually identify with it, and it will, you hire a lawyer to represent you. Say it's a car accident. Well, it often will take 2 years for that case to actually have a jury trial, to be finalized. And during the process, the lawyers are doing things to gather information and to ready and simplify the trial that you will eventually have. Well, lots of times the judge is having to rule on things that those lawyers are working on. And so as a matter of just hours, I'll probably spend over half my hours reading things that lawyers provide me to read and understand and then to rule on motions. Also will hold hearings, disputes among the lawyers about what should be heard at trial, and then preparing for trial, and then trials.
And you said that's probably going to be the most boring part of your job?
It's not exciting to talk about, right? I mean, is it exciting to talk to somebody about reading a book that you're never going to read? I mean, that's similar to that.
Now,
let me back up and say those issues are the most important. I mean, if you're a plaintiff or a defendant in a big lawsuit like we're talking about, it probably is going to be the most important matter that you ever have in the legal system in your entire life. Okay, for most people, when they're involved in a lawsuit like this, they underestimate how stressful it is, and they underestimate just how much it could change their lives. And so for the parties in front of you, it is probably in no ways boring. It is hugely stressful and important to their life. And so it's very important that you have a judge who understands the consequences and will rule in a way that will treat everyone equally and without bias and fairly, with integrity, however you want to put it, right? Has the heart right, for treating people well.
Yeah, I was going to ask you this next question.
All right.
How how does a judge supposed to carry out his or her duty? And then the second part of the question is, what is your philosophy
All right. So,
behind being a judge?
all right. So we have an adversary system, which means that you have lawyers who represent the plaintiff. And I'm talking about civil cases now. In criminal cases, you have a prosecutor and you have a defendant's lawyer. In civil cases, you have a plaintiff's lawyer and a defendant's lawyer. Plaintiff's lawyer being the one who's sued because they've been injured or think they've been injured. And so your job as a judge is to help the parties work through the process. So then the jury they usually settle the case. 90% of the cases actually settle because the lawyers can make a judgment as to who might or most likely to win and how much the damages might be. And then in 10% of the cases, you actually maybe have a jury trial. And so your job as a judge is sort of be the referee or the umpire, right? You're not playing the game. One of the really hardest parts of my job is going to be when an individual is trying to represent themselves. Rarely does that go well. Often, an individual who's trying to represent themselves will lose the case because they don't understand the procedures and the process. And so, from my perspective, if I think that a party is trying to represent themselves and they have a meritorious case, I mean, they have a case where they, really, I mean, it's not a foregone conclusion what the result should be, then I usually will try to help them find a lawyer. If they can't afford one who will represent them for free, pro bono. We have programs in Birmingham and Jefferson County that do those types of things. And so, but, in a civil case, more so than any other, you're really playing a role like a referee would in a basketball game. All right. Now, do you want a referee who's never played basketball? Do you want a basketball referee who's never played basketball? No, you want one who understands the game and has years of experience so he can make the right calls. And so that's why having experience in the courtroom of the type where you're trying to serve as a judge, where you're a candidate to be a judge, is really important.
So, well, yeah, that's a very good way of looking at it. Now, in terms of being fair and partiality when it comes to the judgeship, what is your views on that? Especially since you are, running for a civil judgeship position. What does that look like for you?
In some ways, the heart of the person that's running for judge is more important than their knowledge of the law and their familiarity with the courtroom. I mean, you have to have someone who has the right heart, all right? And so, I've been talking about some of the things that I've done in my past. I hope that you can draw some conclusions about my heart from my having been a Peace Corps volunteer, from my having represented people who could not afford a lawyer. The issue, I would say I've gotten to know a number of the candidates for the criminal positions and the domestic relations positions that are up on the ballot May 24th also. And I've been very impressed with the other candidates who I've seen over and over again as we go to different places and talk to people about whether or not we're the best candidate for the place that we're running for. I only have one opponent for my position, but I'm really talking about the criminal and the domestic relations positions that are also running. And I've been very impressed at the heart, really how good of a judge I think those people will be, because they all seem to have the right approach to the law and to the types of cases that they'll handle. And so, it's very hard, right? How do you know whether someone is going to handle things with the right heart? Are they going to treat everybody without bias? Or are they going to promote equal justice? Are they going to do things with integrity? And so you can listen to what they say, but sometimes more important than that is to look at what they've done in the past.
That's a very good answer, because I think, when we talk about the judicial system, whether it's criminal or civil, the the part where, you know, is the judge going to be fair? Is he going to be impartial? That comes up a lot because, you know, we're seeing a lot of cases to where, in terms of Caucasians and African Americans, uh, it's the justice system seems to be, you know, in favor of one ethnic group, you know, versus another. And I'm assuming that that not only take place in the criminal sector, the judicial system, but it also take place in a civil sector. Is that true?
It can, all right, it can. And that was more of an issue 10, 20, 30 years ago. So one of the things I can tell you is the judgment of people who've been judges. All right, Houston Brown was the first Black presiding judge in Jefferson County. And he really is, Judge Houston Brown is the person who talked to me that got me over the hump and made me decide to run for this position because he was encouraging me to do it. And Justice Ralph Cook, who was the second Supreme Court justice, Black Supreme Court justice in the state of Alabama's history, and retired now, is the other person who's a friend of mine and who encouraged me to run. And so I hope that those that are listening to you can understand that I've had these men who I look up to, right, who encouraged me to run and use their judgment as to whether or not I would do that well as another way to think about, you know, am I somebody who is going to treat everyone in my courtroom as I would hope I would be treated if I was there.
Yeah, I was going to ask you who are or were your mentors throughout your judicial career?
You know, so you know, you have to answer this two different ways. I worked for big firms for most of my career, and I had lawyers there who taught me how to try cases. And they're considered some of the best lawyers in the state of Alabama. And that's how I think I learned how to be the lawyer that I am. And so, but politically, right, which is really leading more to my running judicially, you know, Houston Brown was the one who I would most rely on. I will tell you that is really not a mentor because I consider him a peer, is Judge Don Blankenship. Don Blankenship and I are good friends. The way we got to be friends is we have sons that are the same age, and they played high school basketball and travel basketball together. And if you've ever had a child who played high school sports or travel type sports, basketball, soccer, whatever sport it might be, you know that the parents spend a lot of time waiting for the games to start. Or you're at tournaments and you're waiting for the next game, right? And so you have a lot of times where you talk to the parents of the other players who are on your child's team. And Don Blankenship and I immediately drew together and became friends just because we had so much in common. And our sons were friends, and our sons are still friends. And so, you know, I don't know. You asked me more about my mentors, and I will rely on Houston Brown and Justice Cook in that role. But Don Blankenship is also my friend who sort of talked me into doing this too. So those are the three men who are judges or retired judges who I relied upon in making my own decision about running for this office.
Do you believe that a judge should be what I call a people's advocate? And if so, what type of issues do you feel that you are a strong advocate of in terms of the position that you're running?
All right, so the answer to the question is yes. You know, a judge needs to be a people person, and it needs to be somebody who wants, you know, when you say what is justice, right? Matter of fact, all right, my favorite Bible verse, all right, is Micah chapter 6, verse 8. And God has told you what is good, and what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. And as a judge, in order to do that, you have to treat the plaintiff, the one who's been injured or thinks he's been injured and has sued somebody who he believes is responsible for it. You have to treat the defendant also well. And so in our judicial system, our adversary system, those parties have lawyers who are representing their interest, and you have to make sure that the jury understands the facts and that the lawyers are able to present the facts to the jury, and then the jury makes the decision. You don't, as a judge, want to be making sure one side or the other wins, right? Your job is to let the adversary system work and to make sure everybody has representation that is adequate and that their side of the case is heard. So yes, but the answer to your question is yes, but it's not in the way that most people would think. So we don't have an inquisitive system like in Europe, where the judge asks the questions and the judge makes all the decisions. We have an adversary system where the jury makes the decisions at the end of the day, or the end of the trial.
Yeah, so for those who are not familiar with that adversary system, can you kind of give the viewers and or listeners a rundown of what does that look like?
All right. So I'm going to use a particular type of case, I guess, to answer your question, because it is the type of case that most people can identify with. And it's a car accident, right? And so two cars collide at an intersection, and both of them think they had the green light. All right. And so are there any other witnesses that might have it? But only one of them was injured, okay? In other words, both cars are damaged, but only one person has to go to the hospital with an injury. So the driver who was injured sues the driver who was driving the other car. Well, most people have insurance, and their automobile insurance will provide them a lawyer, and then the person who's been injured might have a lawyer who represents them from the insurance company, but they'll also hire a lawyer to represent them. And a lot of times people, for example, identify those lawyers by the ones who advertise on billboards, or maybe they go to a lawyer who a friend of theirs has recommended or used in the past, or maybe they go to a lawyer that they know and ask, what lawyer should I use? All right. Having a good lawyer who handles those types of cases can make the difference between winning and losing that lawsuit. All right. Now, the insurance companies hire good lawyers, right? And because they want to make sure they don't have to pay more than they're supposed to, make sure they don't pay for claims that they should be paying. And so they usually have good lawyers. And so for the adversary process to work well, both lawyers on both the lawyers on both sides, right? The lawyer representing the driver who's been sued and the lawyer representing the plaintiff, the one who's been injured and is suing, they both have to know what they're doing.
Okay, now we got, I have 3 more questions for you, and then we're going to wrap it up.
All right, great.
And you probably get this all the time that, your name, Chris Christie, has been associated with the Chris Christie who lives in New Jersey.
Yes.
I'm quite sure you get that all the time. So,
yes,
what do you tell them? I know this is kind of like a little fun question here.
All right. So often when I introduce myself to a crowd, I will tell them that my name is Chris Christie, and I am the original Chris Christie, that I was born 3 years before that Republican in New Jersey who tried to take my name. And I was born, I'm 3 years older than the other Chris Christie. And so, look, I know I look younger than the other Chris Christie. I hope that's because I've got good genes. My mother's 86 and still can run errands and take care of her own business, lives at home by herself. And I hope when I'm 86, I'm still able to do that. And I frankly hope I continue to have good health.
So even though we got a couple of more days before the election, if people want to know more about you and your campaign, how do they be able to reach you?
All right. So I have 3 different types of social media that they can access. And one is and the easiest one in terms for this judicial race is if you just will Google Christie for Judge, and that's Christie, the number 4 judge.com. The first thing that'll pull up will be my campaign webpage. Another thing that will pull up will be my Facebook page. And if you want to see the videos where, for example, Judge Houston Brown has endorsed me, Justice Ralph Cook has endorsed me. Judge Don Blankenship has endorsed me. If you go to my Facebook page, you can see those 1-minute videos. And I'm really honored that they were willing to do that for me as I'm running for this office. In addition to that, you can enter the name of my law firm, Denton Sirote, and my last name, Christie, and Sirote, S-I-R-O-T-E. Actually, if you just do Sirote and Christie, it'll pull up, and you can find my webpage for my law firm, where at my job right now, and you can find more details about things I've done in the past on my personal webpage at my law firm than you will ever care to read. But there are videos of presentations I've done in the past that you can find on that webpage. Lots of information. You could spend hours going through that information, and I can't imagine why you would if you were that interested in my background.
Oh, okay. And then the last question is, what would be your appeal to the voters for May 24th?
You know, my major appeal is vote. Go to the polls and vote. It is a right that we have as citizens in the United States, and I think too many people don't treasure the right to vote the way they should. And so my primary and my first thing would be to tell them to go vote. Now, I will also like people to vote for me on May 24th, right? So don't just go to vote, go vote for me on May 24th, and ask your family and your friends to vote too. Remind them that it's an election day. And if you don't exercise the right, if you don't take advantage of it, you may lose it. And our right to vote is hugely important. And so my primary message to people is go vote on May 24th.
Mr. Christie, thank you so much for being part of this podcast. I know you had a very busy day, and me too. I'm actually on the road.
Yeah. I hope people, if they see my background, I'm in a closet trying to talk to you because I'm at my campaign headquarters right now.
So we kind of like in a, awkward position here, but, hey, you got to do what you got to do, right?
Yes. Well, you wanted to talk to me, and I wanted to talk to you. And so I'm glad we got to do this.
And we are really doing a shout out for, all the candidates that are running. We have done lots of things to deliver information about the candidates who are running in Alabama, not just Jefferson County, and we're seeing some huge numbers. Yeah. So just glad that you are part of this, and best wishes on your campaign, and we'll see what happens. Now, coming up tomorrow, we're going to have a network meet and greet in Birmingham, and we're starting to advertise for that already. It's going to be at, if I got, I don't have it out the top of my head because we're just we just started to do advertising for it, but it's like an election eve reception.
All right.
And we're going to be podcasting live. It's tomorrow at 6 p.m. And
send me an email and I'll try to be there.
Yeah, okay. So I know it's going to be at a church, but I can't remember the church at the top of my head. The address is 2507 24th Avenue North.
Okay. All right.
So if you can't make it there, we will also be streaming from Zoom. And so any candidate that wants to participate will be able to participate on Zoom if they can't go in person. But if you would like to come in person, that's fine. And reach out to me and we'll make sure we get you a flyer.
All right, great.
You can pass it around to whoever wants to come. That would be great. And this would be a chance for the voters to, hear your pitch one more time before they decide to go to the polls. So I always say, if whatever you give an opportunity to speak in front of voters, I'll take it.
All right. And let me say this, Keith. Keith Williams has done a great job bringing information to the voters, and I thank you for doing that.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I said earlier, whether people give me props or not, what I have done this campaign season, primaries rather, is to provide as much information as I can for all of the candidates so that you, the voters of Alabama, will have an intelligent decision to make on who to vote for, because you have all the information on all of the candidates and not just the ones, that certain organizations and individuals are promoting. Everybody has a seat at the table. And so it is a public service that we're doing to the voters so that you will have all of the candidates' information and that you can do the research for yourself and contact the candidates for yourself so that on Tuesday you would know who you will vote for. And we're not charging for this. This is free of charge. Again, this is a public service to the voters of Alabama. And I'm so glad that you are one of the candidates that are running. I wish you the best and good luck on Tuesday, and we'll see what happens.
Thank you.
All right, and that will conclude this podcast, and we'll see you tomorrow at 6 p.m. For now, I'm Keith Williams, your host for The Works. Thank you so much. Enjoy your evening.